Michelle Arnosky Sherburne started working in a weekly newspaper immediately after graduating from high school. After 40 years in the newspaper business, she has gone full circle, from typesetter, proofreader, production ad layout, copy editor, production manager, advertising sales manager, and now publisher with production and sales hats. In 2022, she and her husband, Rodney, took over the stewardship and business of the Journal Opinion, a weekly newspaper in Bradford, Vermont. She and Rodney have been married 38 years. They live in Newbury and have a son and daughter-in-law who live close by. Researching and writing about history has been a part of Michelle's life since high school. She has freelanced for magazines and newspapers and is a published author of history books. Michelle focuses on Vermont and New Hampshire's Underground Railroad, the New England abolitionist movement, and Vermonters in the Civil War. Her book on the St. Albans raid was researched, written, and released in 2014, the year of the raid's 150th anniversary. She has served as a raid consultant and guest on the Travel Channel's Mystery at the Museum raid segment, has been a consultant of a strategy board game on the raid that will be released in 2026, and has hosted school reenactments of the raid. Please welcome Michelle Arnosky Sherburne.
Thank you very much, and I'm really excited to be here. And I brought a lot of toys with me, as you can see. Part of the reason I have so many is, one, when I was researching it, I bought every book, every promotional piece that I could on the raid when I was researching. And then after that, I found that it is a great tool to teach history to children. So when I'm invited to a school, I will, and I'm going to talk about the raid, we do a raid reenactment. And everybody gets a role, and we have banks set up, and we have fake money, we have fake Colt revolvers, and sometimes they use chairs, or they use scooters in the gym to be horses. And we do a reenactment, and bank robberies happening, and hostages being taken, usually teachers, and they love that. The kids love it. But what it does is it makes them remember, because they did the raid. It's something they'll never forget, because it is a spectacular story, but it's even better when you get to act it out, role play. So it's a fun thing. And so a lot of the pieces, like even the rolled newspapers, those are all part of the reenactment tools that I've had in the past. So that is why there's so much stuff that goes with it. And also I wanted to show that there's been a lot written about the St. Albans raid. And it's still amazing that something that happened that has been written about, and there's a lot of documentation, so many people around the country and even in Vermont don't know about the raid. So that's what I'm here to tell you about. It's a fantastic story on both sides, and we're going to walk through it, okay? And I have a feeling that a lot of this is just going to be off the top of my head, so please bear with me. What you see here is what the 21 raiders who infiltrated St. Albans, that's what they were calling it when they were planning it, the Vermont Yankee Scare Party, because the whole point was going to be to scare the Yankees and stir things up for the Confederacy. So the book, that's the book cover. The painting on the cover was actually done by Robert Eldridge, who was, back in 2014, he was in his 80s. He, I believe he lived in Georgia, which is close to St. Albans, and he just a local painter. And it's a gorgeous painting. The year 2014 was the 150th anniversary of the raid. And they did a calendar, which I have a copy here, and they had locals do paintings that were selected. But Bob Eldridge, this one really captured the essence of the of the raid itself. So I was really fortunate that he gave me permission to use it. So as I said, a lot has been written. Recently, I think Roland told me he watched the Van Heflin in The Raid, which was filmed in the 40s, I believe. And so a lot of people might have heard about it. And, well, Roland, you'll find out that there's quite a bit in that movie that was Hollywoodized and not actually accurate. But then again, even the Mysteries at the Museum show they did on it, that wasn't as accurate either, even though they had me on the show. So the whole point of the raid is the fact that it is totally misunderstood. Misinformation was out there. The raiders themselves totally misconstrued. And even 160 plus years later, we still haven't connected all the dots about what this raid was about. That there was a bigger picture. There was a great conspiracy that was happening during the Civil War that the Confederacy was working on with their Secret Service. And it's a fabulous history to dive into. But things were all connected. The whole idea was to try to undermine Lincoln's administration, undermine the Yankee side, versus the rebels. And we have John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated President Abraham Lincoln. Everybody was, even today, they still say he was just a crazy guy that just snapped and went after Lincoln. That's not true. That was part of a bigger plan. And all the things, and I even have on the bottom right, is the picture of the raiders after some of them had been arrested in Canada. They have been misunderstood for years because they've been called, renegades, and they were soldiers who went AWOL and were hiding in Canada, and they came down and they were stealing from the banks for their own gain. They were all these things. They were the people that were in St. Albans considered them devils, and they were awful. These demons that came into their city, and all of that is a misrepresentation of what these men actually were. And on the on the right, we have a picture of the leader, Lieutenant Bennett Young. He was 21 years old in 1864 when the raid happened, and he was he was from Kentucky, and he was part of a cavalry unit, Captain John Morgan's cavalry unit, which went on raids throughout the South and worked their way north across the Mason-Dixon line. And they were raiders, not the typical battles that you hear about with Civil War. So we're going to learn a little bit more about Bennett Young and how he worked this all together. But we kind of have to figure out what was going on for this idea of going into a New England town and trying to take it over. So we're in 1864, and things aren't going great. The battles, most of the battles are being held in the South. So the South is just decimated. All the cities and the homes, the plantations, everything down there is decimated. Governor's mansions were huge targets. The Union forces would burn them to the ground when they got to them. There was a lot of destruction going on. And by 1864, the Union was winning more battles. They were faring better, even though some battles didn't seem that way. So President Jefferson Davis of the Confederate States of America, he decided, even the year before, 1863, that it would be good to take advantage of our spies and our undercover operations. And let's take advantage of Canada, which was sympathetic to the Confederacy. And so what he did was he sent agents up to Canada to set up headquarters up there, all undercover, and also to put together missions. And the three we're going to focus on of the commissioners, because he did send probably half a dozen, were Clement Clay on the left, Jacob Thompson in the middle, and George Sanders on the right, okay? Because we're going to hear those names throughout the talk. And so Jefferson Davis had them set up in Toronto, Ontario, and in Montreal, Quebec. And when they went to these cities, they would rent, a whole floor or two of a hotel. So the St. Lawrence Hotel, the headquarters for the Confederate Secret Service, would be like one whole floor. And the same with the Queen's Hotel in Toronto. And this is where all of your spies would be headed up to Canada. They would get through enemy lines, and that's where they would exchange gold. They would exchange money. They were getting funding. Then they would come back down to Richmond, Virginia, which was the capital of the Confederate States. And that's where, so you were doing this almost like a triangle. You had Toronto, Montreal, and then you had Richmond, Virginia, where their presidency was. So you had all of these spies going through. John Wilkes Booth was a spy. John Harrison Surratt. You had a lot of spies that we've heard about throughout our history lessons. So 1863, as the commissioners are setting up in Canada, we also have our young Bennett Young, who has been captured with his fellow compatriots in the Morgan Raiders, and he's a prisoner of war, and I believe he's in Camp Douglas, okay? So he's a prisoner, and then he escapes with all of his buddies. And what do when they escape from a Union prison? They head to Canada. That's the closest, the safest. They don't have to cross enemy lines. So Camp Douglas was in Chicago, Illinois. And so we have Bennett Young and his buddies all up in Canada, like so many Confederate soldiers who were prisoners of war and escaped. Okay? So the commission in 1864, they started thinking of different plans, different missions that could be done. And Jacob Thompson, one of the commissioners, he orchestrated, let's do some prison releases. So they did attempts. They attempted to free over 5,000 Confederate prisoners in Camp Douglas. They also tried to free 7,000 Confederate prisoners in Johnson Island in Lake Erie. So they tried these things, but they would always fail. It was not going well. Someone would rat them out. And then you have this Bennett Young, who has been a raider. He's been on a cavalryman where the raiders, they ride into a town and they burn it down and they steal what they can and they claim it for the Confederacy. He's like, why not try that? So he actually talks to the higher ups. He actually works his way down to Richmond and runs it by the Secretary of War, and who runs it by the President Jefferson Davis. This would be a great thing. It would be retaliation for all of the horrible things that are happening in our South. If we could go to the north and do the same and hit all these different towns on the Canadian border, that would just kind of deflect maybe sending troops up there. So it sounded like a great idea. It was a great idea. And so they started planning this. Wasn't something where a bunch of guys got together, in a pub or something up in Canada and were drinking and said, wouldn't it be neat if we could go and we could, burn a town down and we could, rob the banks. No, this was stuff that was in the works. In the summer of 1864, even over in Ontario on the Niagara Falls side, the Canadian side of the Niagara, they were planning this. And this was a commissioned mission. This was the document on the right actually says Lieutenant Young on it, and it has his expense account he's given for this. And all of this was part of a secret mission. And it was all stamped with approval from the higher-ups of the Confederacy. And so the commissioner said, yes, do this. And you need to pick 20 men that you trust, and that's all. We want it to be small and inconspicuous. So that's what he did. He actually took his fellow Kentuckians, his friends that were in his cavalry unit, and they had all escaped with him. So he picked all of his friends. He knew that he could trust them. Most of them were about his age. They were in their early 20s. There was only one or two older, like 38. One of them was 38, but most of them were young guys. And he knew that he could trust them. And we do have, so there were 20 of them. And we know who these are. And I have them on the poster over there. But they were all from Kentucky. William Hutchinson, Squire Tevis, Charles Swagger, Marcus Spur, Thomas Collins, George Scott, James Doty. Well, there's 20 guys, okay? A total of 20 guys. I'm not going to read all their names, but Bennett Young had, in September, he had made reconnaissance missions down into Vermont because, well, he had moved over to Montreal with his 20 compatriots, and he did some checking some things out, and he decided that St. Albans was really close to the Canadian border, and it was perfect because in the 1860s, St. Albans was a railroad city. It was the largest railroad city, bigger than Burlington, between Montreal and Boston. There were 27 tracks that actually went through St. Albans. And not only did they have all of this traffic of trains coming through, they also they produced rail cars. So they had these huge brick buildings that are no longer there, but they built rail cars in them. And so then they would ship those out because we're in the 1840s when the railroad era started, when it was going across country. So this was the hot ticket. And St. Albans was the place in northern New England. So that was right there, you have the railroad. That meant that they had a lot of strangers coming to town every week. A lot of hotels in St. Albans, a lot of taverns, a lot of pubs. They were used to strangers. Not like if they came to my town of Newbury, all of a sudden that you see 20 strangers in town. It's like, well, we'd all notice that because we have a general store and we have a town clerk's office and a library. We don't even have a traffic light. I mean, that's how, quaint Newbury is. But they were used to strangers, and every week they were used to it. They also, every Tuesday was market day. And that meant that all of the farmers in Franklin County would bring all their produce to St. Albans, to the big public green, and that's where they would sell it, and it would be distributed, and they would get on rail cars, and it would be sent south. So you had all of this. They had 4 banks in St. Albans. And part of the reason was the farmers had to be able to go and cash in after market day. So Bennett Young checked all this out. He went undercover and he would visit in September. A couple times he went to the town, checked it out. Well, look at that. We have a public green right in the center. And then the railroad and all of the foundry and the train factories are all down closer to the lake, and they're all away from the center of town where all of the banks are. And the other draw for St. Albans, the other reason to target it, was that Governor John Gregory Smith lived in St. Albans. His governor's mansion was in St. Albans. Right there, hands down, that would get votes of all 21 of those Kentucky guys. Let's burn down the governor's mansion just like they're doing it to ours down south. So perfect. So we got, oh, this is perfect. It's almost a trifecta. So, yeah, so it was fantastic. And he was like, this is great. We're close to Canada. We can infiltrate the town. There's lots of stuff going on, a lot of people, and they won't notice us. And so they started planning. Bennett Young and his 20 guys, and they were called the 5th Regiment of Regulators. No, I'm sorry, 5th. That's from another show. Okay, sorry. No, they were the 5th Regiment of Retributors. There we go, Retributors, retribution, okay? That's what their job was. The mission was to go in and take them by surprise, rob the banks to get the money to fill the coffers up in Canada for the Confederacy, and burn the governor's mansion and burn the town, and let's start here. And then let's just do it all the way across New York State, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. Let's just cover the whole North so that Lincoln and Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, just freak out and start sending all of their troops up north. That was the plan. The Vermont Yankee Scare Party. So that was the grand plan. Now they had to get to St. Albans. And this is the tricky part. They weren't going to ride in with flags waving and, and rebel yells, and they weren't going to take over the town that way. They were going undercover. So all they could have with them were Colt revolvers and their bullets. And they didn't even have their own form of transportation. They had to come in by railroad, by boat, by carriage. They had to steal horses. Okay, that made them even worse, horse thieves. So, and the other thing that they had that's not alcohol, the other part of their strategy was we're burning the town down. And so they decided to use bottles of Greek fire. Have you heard of Greek fire? Have we heard about it? It is a mixture of sulfur, naphtha, and phosphorus, and it's flammable. It's a liquid. And if you have it in a glass bottle like they did, the air reacts to it, but also the impact. So if you took a bottle of it and you smashed it on the ground, a fire would start and it would just start to grow. And the more water you put on it, the higher the flames. It's a great movie, Timeline, with Paul Walker, Jared Butler, and they introduce Greek fire in it. And they show that you can't put out the fire. So wouldn't this be great? All we have to do is have a bunch of bottles. So this was the plan. So they had to get there, like I said, but this is an undercover operation. So Young instructed his men that we're going to slowly go into town. And so we're going to shoot for October 18th is what they said. So October 18th, 1864, they were going to do the raid. So what they decided, so Young and a couple men arrived by train on October 10th. And then 2 more came on another train. And when they came in 2s and 3s. They didn't mix with each other. They weren't wearing uniforms. They really covered their accents. So their southern drawl wouldn't set them off and have everybody know who they were. They were pretending to be either they were British tourists or they were soldiers on reprieve. They were there for hunting. They all had a backstory. And they came in 2s and 3s. And like I said, they came by buggy, they came by boat, and they registered at the different hotels. So here the American House is on Main Street. The Tremont House is on Main Street. The St. Albans House was on Lake Street. And so they stayed in their little groups. They'd get their rooms and just kind of mix and mingle. And that involved reconnaissance missions. So once they were all in town the week before the raid, they were checking things out like, how many stables are in town? Where are the horses? Okay, where are the weapons? Let's go to the hardware stores. Let's ask about going hunting. We're going to go partridge hunting. Can you, do you have guns? They were trying to get information, and they figured it out. And Young also found out that Tuesday's not a good day. That's market day. Everybody's here. You can't have the whole town full of people, have it double in size, and have 21 guys try to take it over. So he nixed that. Let's do Wednesday. The next day, everybody's gone, and the banks are full because all the farmers went to the bank before 3 o'clock on Tuesday, and then so the bank vaults are full. So that is how that's what they did. They went and they figured out all of these different side information, where people were, when it's quiet. And Young was, even back in September when he stayed in town. Sorry, I thought I turned that off. Whoops. Sorry, Marita. He went and visited the governor's mansion. He went and he met, let's see, do I have a picture of that? Which was close, was in town. He went and visited with the first wife, Ann Smith, and she showed it, he just said he was a theological student and that he was here on a break from theology school. So she thought he was really this wonderful young man, very interesting. And she showed him all of the great horses that they have in their stables. And he also found out that, let's see, Wednesday, coming up, there's going to be about 40 St. Albans men who aren't off fighting the war. They're all going to be in Montpelier and Burlington in Montpelier, they'll be at the legislature, at the State House, and in Burlington, there was a Supreme Court case going on, so they were a bunch of them were going to be there. So we have 40 men gone. And we know, if you look at my little map here, I'm pointing out Main Street, the green is in the middle. Okay, and where the hotels are in, yep. Yes, the hotels are black arrows: American House, Tremont House, St. Albans House. And then the banks are pretty much, we have 3 banks: First National, Franklin County Bank, and then St. Albans Bank. They're all right there. And if we can keep everything contained up here on Main Street, all of the retributors were all like, this is perfect. This town was just laid out for this. It's great. And if we station a couple guys on Lake Street, on any of the streets that lead down to where the railroad station and all of the railroad is, the center, if we keep those men there, because there's about 400 workers down there working on the rail cars and working on the railroad. And then you have a foundry. So you have a lot of men with sharp tools and a lot of able-bodied men who are working there. So let's keep this contained. That was the plan. So they decided that, remember, they're not mixing, but they sent word that we have to meet. And so they decided for Wednesday, October 19th. The anniversary is actually this coming Sunday, right? Isn't Sunday the 19th? So on the 19th, they were going to all go and have like lunch in the different hotels. And then they were going to meet at the American House, kind of filter upstairs and end up meeting so that they could go over the last points. And Lieutenant Bennett Young could tell everybody exactly what the plan was, who's going to be stationed where, who's going to enter the banks. He had it very strategic, at least 2 or 3 men per bank. He was going to have on the green. He was going to have a couple men stationed there to receive hostages, to take hostages. And also he would have men guarding those streets. So this is all planned out, except for like the getaway car stuff and how you're going to carry what you steal from the banks, because they had just haversacks, right? So you're just going to have a haversack, like a man purse, all right? And their pockets, they're not wearing uniforms, and they don't have a getaway wagon, so they can just take what they can carry. That's got to be good enough. So all of this is planned. And and at the meeting on that morning when they had lunch, he handed out the bottles of Greek fire, okay? They had 40 bottles and they dispersed them. The plan was rob the banks, start to burn the town, head up to the governor's mansion and start the fires there. And then once we do that, then we're out of here. So let's get this done. So after the meeting, they kind of all filtered out to their prospective stations. And Bennett Young went back to the Tremont house where he was staying, and he went upstairs. He got ready. He was ready. It was going to be 3 o'clock. You had to hit it when the banks were going to close, just before they closed, so that nothing was locked up. The vaults weren't locked up. And also, school hadn't let out yet. So you have up a street beyond the green is where the school is. So you have all of those, you have the kids all up there, and it's very quiet. It was quiet in the morning. The only thing that is a problem is that it's been raining off and on for about a week and a half. And that means if you live on a dirt road like I do, okay, it's mud. And the streets are mud. And around the common, around the green, they have planks. They use planks instead of sidewalks. And they're sinking in the mud. And it's dreary and raining Wednesday morning. We're just going to go with it. We're just going to go with it. So Bennett Young, he's going to start the raid. Are you ready? We're ready. We're going to go. We're going to do this raid. So he walks out of the Tremont house. He pulls his Colt revolver out. Yeah, I got to move, right? Okay, so he pulls out his Colt revolver and he walks out in the center of Main Street and he puts it in the air and he says that I take possession of this town in the name of the Confederate States of America. Well, he's just walking out. There's people sitting on the stoop and stuff, and they're like, they start laughing at him, and they don't take him seriously. But that was the cue. And that's when his men went into the banks, and then Bennett Young started shooting. And he just started shooting his revolver in the air, and something's not right. It's not funny anymore. So this happens. We have 3 banks, and you have the men walk in, and some of them are like very casual, so what's the price of gold, they ask the teller. And then once he tells them, they went, well, I'm not interested in selling, but I'm interested in taking, so I'm taking over this bank in the name of the Confederate States of America and turn over all the gold you have and all your money. And so they start holding up at the different banks. And the people coming in, there's a, Samuel Breck comes in because he's going to make a deposit before the bank closes, and one of the raiders grabs his money, says, "Thank you, you've just helped the coffers of the Confederate States of America." They do 3 bank robberies at once. It's like brilliant, actually. It's quite a heist. It's scary though, because they are threatening them. They did threaten. And they forced, it was in the First National Bank, they forced the teller to swear allegiance to the Confederacy. Because if you do that, it means you're not actually stealing because you're both on the same side. And so they actually threatened, and the guys weren't going to do it, but when you've got a revolver pointed at your head, you're going to say just about anything he says to do. You say dance, I'm going to dance, okay? So he pledged allegiance, and they actually locked two of the men. I think that's Jackson Clark, the guy with the top hat. He was in the bank doing a deposit, and I think it was Marcus Beardsley. They actually threw them into the vault and closed the door while Marcus Beardsley is screaming, it's airtight, we will suffocate. And they said, it's okay, we're burning down the city anyway, so don't worry, it'll be a little bit cooler in there. So they actually turn the key and leave the guys in the vault, and when they're done, they come out on the street. That's where out on the street, things have started to get chaotic. It's not just bank robberies. It's Bennett Young has one of the guys gets him a horse. So he mounts the horse and he starts going back and forth on Main Street, riding back and forth, yelling and shooting the revolver. And if any of the men that were like coming outside to see what all of the fuss was about, he would shoot at them. And any farmers coming in with wagons, you'd have raiders that would stop them, steal their horses, and then send those farmers to the green. And you had them held hostage. They were being held hostage on the green. The bottom picture shows you an illustration of how they were all being held. Any women that were they were headed to school to pick up the kids. Anybody that was on Main Street or near it was being brought to the green and held hostage. Gunpoint. We're talking noise, and we're talking horses being pulled out of the different livery stables, and this is frightening. It seems, when you're looking at the cartoon, which is the illustration, it doesn't look that dramatic or scary, but it was noisy. You had people who were in their houses, like in an apartment on Main Street, hear all this like fireworks. Did we win the war? And they'd come outside going, what are we celebrating? Did we win? And then Bennett Young would ride by and shoot towards them and go, no, we're taking your town. And remember the Greek fire? That was the other thing. Lots of smoke. Yes, I said smoke. Yes, they started once they got the soldiers got the horses, then they would take out their bottles of Greek fire and they would smash it against the buildings. The problem is no flames because the buildings were wet. Figure that out. You can't put it out with water, but it doesn't work on water? I don't know. I'm not a scientist. You have to look that one up. But it didn't work. All it did was almost like a magician's trick. Boom, and then there's smoke. So here you have them trying to burn these buildings, and all you have is smoke. Loud glass shattering and smoke. No flames. And Bennett Young's going, oh, okay. Think on your feet. We can't burn down a mansion. None of us brought, matches. Right? No dynamite. I didn't hear that in it, just the Greek fire. That did not work because it was wet. So the other thing that's happening is that you have hostages being taken, like I said, in the school. All the kids are in the school, and it's the end of the day assembly. And they're on the top floor, the top building, the top windows in the bliss room, where the principal is doing the end of the day announcements when a teacher comes over and whispers in his ear. Because she's looked outside and saw that something's happening in town. So, very calmly, Dorsey Taylor, the principal, says, we have bad men doing bad things out on the street. We all need to calmly get to the basement and stay here. We will not, none of us will leave. We will stay right here until it's over. So you had teachers and children, this was all grades, in that building, going down the stairs and getting to the basement. And guess who was looking out windows? All the kids are like, what's going on? I don't say, is that my mom? Okay, no, That guy's riding a horse. He's got a revolver. They all work their way to the basement, and the school was basically put on a lockdown. And thank goodness for that. And quick thinking. So we have all of this noise and all of this, and Bennett Young and the raiders, once they are getting on horses, and once the bank robberies are done, then you have them like, okay, we're working our way north, but they are shooting at people, and they're shooting at anybody that tries to shoot them. So a couple of the guys did get, bullets whizzing past them, and you have that, and the yelling and all of this noise. Just beyond Main Street is where this 5-story hotel is being built. This is the Weldon House, and that's what the top picture is like what it looked like when it was done. You had construction men working there. Well, one of the stable owners has come into town. He rode into town and he sees all of this chaos going on. And he sees that Bennett Young is right up near where his stables are, Erasmus Fuller and his stables. And Erasmus sees him and starts yelling at Young, who tries to shoot at him. So Erasmus runs into the stable, grabs a pistol or a rifle, I don't know which it was, but either way, it didn't work, because he ran out and he aimed it at Bennett Young and tried to shoot, and it went, anyway, oh, okay. Bennett starts laughing. Erasmus runs back into the shop. He's trying to get this thing to work. It's not working. So he decides to work his way, run out and sneak around behind Main Street to where the construction site is. And when he gets up there, he yells to the contractor, Linus Morrison, who was there from Manchester, New Hampshire. He was in charge of the construction. He said, "We need to gather men. We are being taken over by rebels. Just grab some guys and come on down to Main Street. We need to stop them." So Linus Morrison just drops whatever he's doing and just starts to run and yells for a couple of his guys to follow. And they run down onto Main Street, following Erasmus. They get down right about where Bennett Young is. And they're on the other side of the street from where the hotels are and the banks. And Young tries to shoot at Erasmus. And he jumps behind this huge elm tree, which you can see in the one picture. He jumps behind that. But unfortunately, Morrison hasn't jumped, and he's headed towards the millinery shop, which is the building on the left there. And he's just about to the door when that bullet that missed Erasmus hit him right through the hand into the abdomen, and he just starts to fall. I'm shot. So Linus falls to the ground. Bennett Young just keeps on going. He's got to rally up his guys. He's got to see where we're at in this raid. Can we leave? Are we met? Can we go? Morrison drops to the ground, and Erasmus runs to his side, and they are able to, he picks him up and gets some help, and they take him down the street to the apothecary shop. So we're going to leave Linus for a minute. So we have one guy really shot. I told you that didn't work. So even if they were trying to get rid of the Greek fire as they're leaving town, and it's still not working, Young is yelling, "Just forget it. Are we met? Can we leave?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're good. We're all good." And so they're all on horseback now. The ones that rob banks have all that money, all that money sticking out everywhere. And then they take off on horseback, except it's not the charge that you're thinking. It's muddy roads. So it's like 5 miles an hour with the horses. Okay, so I was very fortunate while writing the book to have a personal tour of all of the sites in St. Albans. This is a little commercial, so hold. Jim Fouts was part of the museum for so long, and he had worked on the walking tour, but he also took 5 hours one day and took me around to all the sites that still exist, and buildings that still exist, and some others that don't. and he showed me where everything happened. And then he said, let's do the escape route, which meant that we took a van and we drove out of St. Albans and we headed to Canada. Well, wait, commercial's not done. And we went slow, okay? We are going very slow, 5 miles an hour in a van on the road to assimilate what horses, farm horses, not cavalry horses, are, how fast they could go in the mud. And so this escape plan was going to work, except that it was going to be slow. So while that is happening, and they got out of town, all the raiders, one got shot from one of the citizens. While that happened, we had Captain George Conger, who had come down onto Main Street while the raid's going on. He had been ushered over onto the green, and then when the soldier wasn't looking, he snuck off, and he runs down to where the rail yard is and the telegraph office, and he says, get your tools, get your weapons, we need to stop the raiders. And that's what he did. He started rallying up the workers, and then he organized about 50 men. And as the raiders are already headed north, Conger has a posse, and they're headed. And his brother-in-law, John, the governor's brother-in-law, Stuart Stranahan, he rallied around and was trying to get men and weapons and horses to follow suit. So we have 2 posses that are going to head after the raiders. The telegraph office is down by the rail yard, I said. So the telegraph operator sends a telegraph to Montpelier. A party of rebel raiders entered this village today, shooting and killing the citizens. They robbed all 3 banks and stole 15 to 20 horses. Sent that to the governor to get word out of the city that something's wrong. So that telegraph, and then the telegraph operator shut the office and grabbed something and joined one of the posses. So you have all these people not scared, not afraid to chase after the raiders, and they all followed. You had 90 men, 2 teams. So the escape route went from St. Albans up to Sheldon, and then worked its way to Enosburg up through to the Canadian border. So you can see the map there. And like I said, very slow. Very slow. They get to Sheldon. There's a bank there, the Missisquoi Bank. They were like, Young said, okay, let's add another one. It's on the way. We can hit it. We can easily grab the money. We're good. No, because there's a farmer and a hay wagon in the covered bridge, and he's taking too long. So they push him out of the way, and they can see in the distance on the hill, Posse 1, Conger and the Posse 1. He's like, we don't have time for the bank. So what they did was they took that, lousy Greek fire, and they threw it on the wagon so that it was smoking and pushed it into the middle of the covered bridge, and then they continued on. So that telegraph that was sent to alert the outside, once Governor John Gregory Smith gets word, he sends word to Washington. A telegraph is sent to Major John Dix, who alerts President Abraham Lincoln and the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. So all of a sudden, they hear that we're being invaded from the north. They thought they were Canadians. They really did. And at the same day, bad day in Washington. We have the Battle of Cedar Creek with about 8 or 9 Vermont units fighting, and it isn't until the end of the day that Stanton and Lincoln find out that we actually won, because it was a really bloody battle. That happened on the 19th as well. And then you get word that St. Albans said, we're being attacked by Canadians. Great, I'm glad I woke up this morning. So speaking of waking up, all of a sudden, all this word is happening. They get the word out, and they start putting posters up, that we're being attacked. Vermont is being attacked. Not just St. Albans, not just a couple raiders. We think there are more. Now, that very slow process, it usually would take about 20 minutes to get from St. Albans up to the Canadian border. This raid happened at 3. They didn't get across the border till 8. 8 o'clock at night. These guys are covered in mud. They've been riding for hours in muck, and they finally just are like, well, we're across the border, we're good, we're fine, they can't come after us. There's treaties in place that you can't do that. And so they ended up crashing, but they split up. They did split up. You had each of them, you had like 2 or 3 go to this place in, I have it written down too. I'm going to get my map. It's in Fredericksburg and in Stansted. They 2 or 3 went and they would stay at the different taverns, and they just crashed. They figure, we're safe, we're here, let's rest. Been a long day, and that was exciting. And Bennett Young went off on his own and stayed in a barn, and some others stayed, they didn't stay in hotels. But what they didn't realize were there 90 men after them. St. Albans men are after them. And you know what? They tried to take our town. We don't care about borders. And they went right across the border, right into Canada, and they start arresting. They start finding where the raiders are. The illustration at the top shows that they talk to the clerk in the tavern. Tavern says, yeah, we had a bunch of muddy guys come in. And it looked like they got money sticking out of their pockets. It's great. They'll pay their bill. So they go up to the room and they startle them and they arrest them. So they end up arresting on Canadian soil. That's not okay. But they end up arresting 14 out of 21. 14. And as they're rounding them up, and you've got Conger, he's got some, and then you've got Stranahan, and he's arrested some. That's when the Canadian authorities stepped in and said, excuse me, you're in Canada. You can't do this. You want to cause an international incident? This could start a war between Great Britain, which owns Canada at this time. It's a dominion. So they have to hand them over to the Canadians. Here you go. And then all that money goes with them. And the Canadian authorities arrest them. And this is, so the end of that night, and by the next morning, we have 14 arrested with about $88,000. In total, they stole $200,000 in 1864 money, currency count. Okay? So we have the rest of the raiders took off, okay? And the goal is they're supposed to get to Richmond and give them the money. So you have them arrested, and they send word to the commissioners in Montreal. They are taken to St. John's, which is close by, and they send word to a commissioner, and so George Sanders shows up, and Reverend Stephen Cameron show up at the jail, and they set up the law defense. They set up, we're going to take care of you guys because we know that's what we're supposed to do. And that's the map I was looking for. Phillipsburg, Stanbridge, Farnham, all of those places, except for Montreal, that's where the 14 raiders were located. And that's when it hits the next day, October 20th, it's media day. It's insane that the raiders attacked a northern town, Vermont. Up in the middle of nowhere, they attacked a town, they stole, they killed. And so this is just, the newspapers love it. And it goes viral, it goes across the pond. The London Times, Ireland, all of them are running articles about this raid and how these hooligans had the gall to go in and rob the banks and kill people. All over the place. So they're in jail. We're just going to leave them right in there right now. They're not suffering, let's put it that way. Because George Sanders, the commissioner, the Confederate commissioner in Montreal, he makes sure that they're well fed and they have plenty of alcohol and they have visitors. So they're not suffering in chains with rats. No. No, they are taken out of that St. John's prison and put into more of a hotel setting. And they're under guard, but George Sanders takes care of them. And so they eat well and sleep well and are very comfortable. And we have pictures of them, in wallpapered rooms. I mean, it's no cells that I know of in the 1800s look like that. Anyway, so we're going to circle back around because part of the word spreading about this raid and how horrific it was, is the fact that there are so many eyewitnesses. There are so many people who were in St. Albans who wrote it down, wrote letters. You had mothers and fathers writing their sons who were fighting on the front, or they have family that lives out of, like in Boston or in Connecticut, and they're writing letters about the rebels took over our town. And this is what I saw. And this is the governor's mansion that did not get burned down. But we have there's a whole account. The governor's wife, Anne Brainerd Smith, wrote a letter to her husband that day, the 19th, and had it sent out saying, this is what happened, and her account, and how they heard all the noise and someone came up the drive and told them a raid was happening. And so her first instinct was, where are the guns and where are the horses? And so she started gathering whatever guns and ammunition they had. And as the raiders have headed out of town, you have Anne standing at the doorway going, okay, here, I got a gun, all right. And then, her brother-in-law would come up, Stranahan, and he'd say, I'm getting a posse together. I need any weapons. Here, take these. We found these in the house. So she kicked into gear. Even though she had a toddler and an infant in arms, she was like, I'm not afraid, and don't you come back to St. Albans, John Gregory, because you have a state to protect. And you had people like that who you messed with their city, and you messed with them, and they were angry. We have Ann Pierce, who wrote to her son Marshall, who was in Boston. Fortunately, Anne's husband Hiram was out of town. He was actually headed to Boston. And so she writes this long letter explaining about these devils that came into town and what they did, and that she was glad that her husband wasn't there because he would have had to go on a posse. This is the kind of reaction people got. We don't have time to go through all of the letters, but there were some really interesting ones. And one thing, I had found it years ago and then forgot about it till someone posted it on Facebook. They were actually, in the middle of that raid, there was a Masonic Lodge meeting, and they were going to instill honors to one of the brothers. And in the middle of that ceremony, which is sacred and secret, right? In the minutes of that meeting, they got interrupted because the rebels had attacked. The prince, when Satan, the prince of devils, commenced a raid upon the banks in St. Albans, money being the root of all evil. And they robbed them of many thousands of dollars, and they stole horses. It goes on about Mr. Morrison getting wounded. It's all in the minutes of the Masonic meeting, and poor Brother Wilcox didn't get he didn't get his honors that day. He had to wait. It was all the devil's fault there. So, I mean, stuff like that. You can, for the book, I tried to get different aspects, different perspectives. Soldiers who are fighting battles, writing home. I heard about the raid. Or mom and dad writing to, their sisters or parents somewhere saying, we're on guard because there's more coming. We're so afraid. Now, as I said, back to the raiders. We had the 14 who were taken care of, and that's one that right there, obviously not 14. That narrowed us down to 5. And then the 2 days after the raid, Linus Morrison, the general contractor at Weldon House, he was taken from the apothecary shop to the hotel he stayed at, the American House, and his wife was able to make it from Manchester before he actually passed, because it was a fatal wound. It was the only fatality in this raid. Other people did get shot and got hurt, but he was the only one that actually died. And there's there's a real tribute. A lot of the buildings on Church Street were built, and the Weldon House, which isn't there anymore, actually were built by Morrison. He was very well known, and so that was sad. And we have pictures of the monument down in Manchester. But while they're waiting for a trial up in Canada, the governor puts a lockdown on the state of Vermont. And this is something I didn't know about till I started researching. The entire state went into lockdown. Every train, every road, all the boats, all the ships or whatever on Lake Champlain, everything was stopped. They had town militias set up, were drilling on the greens in the commons near the town hall in every town from the Canadian border down to the Massachusetts border, because they thought the Canadians were going to attack. They did not know who these people really were. They did not understand what was happening. And so they literally set up camp, and it was a war zone. And people wrote about that. Like, I never thought that the war would come up here, and here it is. We have camps. We have soldiers of the men who are still, who are here, not off at war. And they had militias in every single town. Lockdown from October 20th all the way into January 1865. And the streets were monitored. If anybody looked suspicious, they arrested them, questioned them, and then jailed them if they didn't believe them. And all of this was like this incredible fear that more was coming. But everybody played their part. Everybody did. If I have to go out and take turns guarding Wallace Hill that I live on, I'm going to go out and I'm going to guard it from, noon to 5. That's what they did. So there's a whole backstory to the trials, but we have to get in there. They did have 2 trials. So I guess this is a good place for it. Let me double check. Yep, okay. So this I don't have slides for. So in Canada, they started a first trial that started in November for the 14 raiders. And what they were charging them with was robbery. Robbery, disturbing the peace, even though it wasn't in Canada. They would not extradite them, even though Stanton tried, General Dix tried, the Canadians would not let go of them. They would not extradite them. So they said, we're going to try them here on our soil. The only problem is that they moved the trial to Montreal, so they're moving for the 14 raiders. It's like a parade. It's like, winning the Super Bowl, and you have all these people lining the streets to get a glimpse of the raiders because they were Confederate sympathizers in Canada. So it's really odd. It gets worse. So they're in Montreal. They're in Montreal, and they start the trials, and right from the get-go, Bennett, all of the, Thomas Collins, all of the different raiders who are arrested say the same thing. I am a Confederate soldier. And I was commissioned by the president of the CSA to do this raid. It is not for personal gain. It was a statement each one made. And they kept going. The lawyers were like, yeah, no. You are hooligans, and this is all for your own gain. You're going to keep the money, and you did this, and you're going to go to jail for it. So they just kept on going with this. But then we got into December with trial 1, and Judge Charles Corsell starts hanging out at the St. Lawrence Hotel with George Sanders and John Porterfield, who are Confederate commissioners in charge of the money. And money is passed between, and a very nice bribery goes to Judge Corsell and also the chief of police, Lamothe. And guess what? The next day there's a decision. We got to let these guys go. They were just acting. It was an act of war. Just let them all go. And we have it there. They were bribed. And then not only did they release the 14 raiders, they also gave them back the money, $88,000. Okay, they gave it to the commissioners, but they did give them back the money. And so when word came from like the prime minister kind of guy, I can't think of his name right now, Lord Monk. When he found out that Judge Corsell did this, he was like telegraphing over the pond to England, and they're like, this is bad, we do not want a war started. And so Lord Monk just is like, no, you have to rearrest them. We're going to deal with you later, Corsell, but we have to find these men. So they put out a warrant for the arrest, and by that time, it's 14 guys. They end up only catching 5. So we're dwindled down, 21, 14, 5. And Bennett Young is in them because he's just in the thick of it. And they arrest them again. Big mistake. And so they start another trial, which goes into April. It's long, it's a circus. All these residents and citizens from St. Albans travel up to Montreal for this. They're the ones that are made to feel like they're the bad guys. Stop picking on them, okay? They're far from home. It's like, I don't know why, but that is what they really were, the bad guys in this, the St. Albans residents. But then we get to April, and we have General Robert E. Lee's surrender, and the war is going to be over. And then we have the assassination of President Lincoln, which kind of, let's null and void on this. Let's stop the trial. So they do. They stop the trials on the 5. They decide to move them over to Toronto, and they keep them there for a while. And unfortunately, Bennett Young is stuck there, and eventually he is released. But the war is winding down. It's technically over. But then they have the assassination, and then all of this intel comes through when they're doing the Lincoln assassinators trials. And that's when everything starts to cross over. This is when things are all connected. That this John Wilkes Booth is not some nutcase, some theater guy that just freaked out and decided to shoot Lincoln. No. Originally, the plan was to kidnap Lincoln and hold him for ransom. That didn't work. They tried different things. And it was all being orchestrated by the commissioners in Canada. So then we have all of these things connected. So if you read the trial transcripts, you start to find out that the same commissioners, George Sanders, Clement Clay, Jacob Thompson from our earlier slide, are all working also in concert with John Wilkes Booth, all the spies, John Harrison Surratt. They're all working together. They did things. It's all connected. Your spies like Sarah, the lady in the veil, Slater, right? Sarah Slater. So she's the lady in the veil. She was She was like with John Harrison Surratt all the time. She was with John Wilkes Booth. She was a spy. All of that stuff is interwoven into a bigger conspiracy. Now, I'm just going to jump to, this is Anne Brainerd Smith, the governor's wife. That's what she looked like during the raid. And then in 1899, there's a picture of her. I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit. We'll come back to my conspiracy thing. So you have all, like I said, all this documentation. You have the transcripts of the trials. You have people who, recollections, letters, all of this. And it painted a very bad picture about the rebels who were the raiders who were really just following orders. They were soldiers, they were given a task, and they did it. It seems like they failed, but I don't think they did. In the Vermonter magazine in 1899, 2 issues, Anne writes all about what it was like, when the raid happened, what her perspective, the information about Bennett Young before the raid and how the men came to town. It's all very interesting, and it's also eyewitness accounts. And then later on, even as late as 1902, Bennett Young, who's now older, not 21-year-old kid, he's an established Kentuckian, and he does end up getting to go back to Kentucky. He was not granted amnesty from April 1865 until 1868. He was not allowed. He was exiled from our country for what he did because he was a leader. And he went to Europe and he got married out of the country, and then he came back to Kentucky when he was allowed. And then later on he writes about the account. And he puts in there documentation. I was a soldier. Really, I was a soldier. And this was the commission. So we have all of this documentation about an event that most people don't know about. Even 2 weeks after the raid, the Frank Leslie, I'm not wired up, I can walk over here. Frank Leslie newspaper, which was covering all of the war, Frank Leslie sends an illustrator up to St. Albans, and they talk with and they interview people who were eyewitnesses. He went around with a local photographer, and then he did a 2-page spread of this raid. This is even just 2 weeks after the raid. I mean, how many times I've researched a lot in 40 years. I have not, you usually don't come with the cartoon of the event. This is fantastic. It has, and this is 2 weeks after, so you're seeing things the way the illustrator saw them. This is just phenomenal. And yes, I had them, I made one, I had 3rd graders, 80 of them, and we decided instead of doing the raid, we did the news coverage of the raid. So we didn't deal with guns in the room. So what we did was they gave me parameters. So they said, we can't do that, don't do the raid, no robbing, and no guns. So I said, okay, how about we do, newspaper reporters. So you had kids with little notebooks and, illustrating and then throwing the newspapers, extra, read all about it. I can't get away from newspapers, sorry. The other thing that's great about this raid is that not only do you have the written word, but you have souvenirs. And John Branch Sr., who was born and raised in St. Albans, was 10 years old when the raid happened, and he was in the St. Albans school that day. And he remembers about the raid. He remembers hearing about it. So he spent his whole life researching and gathering. There's a book over there that he wrote about it. There was a lot of stuff that he collected through knowing everybody. And there wasn't a St. Albans museum at the time or a historical society back in the 60s. So John Branch built this incredible box, souvenirs of the St. Albans raid, and he donated it to the Vermont Historical Society. So when I went up there to see what they had, they rolled this out. They rolled it out. It's huge and it's tall, and you start pulling stuff out. So in there is, I think, let's see, did I get a picture of it? All right, there's the museum. There's copies. The museum has stuff like this, actual currency from the raid that was actually found down south and sold on eBay. And I was looking for this. I don't know if I have a picture of it. But John Branch saved something like this, where it's a spent bullet that's exploded and hit a wall during the raid. And actually, there was this guy, H. Tucker, I can't remember his first name. He actually picked it up off the ground and saved it, and it looks like gum. I don't know if I have a picture. Oh yeah, there it is on the right. And he saved it, and in the note, he gave it to John Branch. In the note, it says that this ball was found that was shot at Captain Conger, one of our posse guys, and he writes, he picked it up, he saved it, and he gave it to John Branch. Stuff like that. I mean, this is so cool. I mean, this box was like phenomenal. The museum itself is definitely worth a day trip. They have a lot of stuff on the railroad history, obviously, being a rail city. But they have a raid room, and they have all these artifacts. They have the vault key and also the key lock, that big box, that was on the vault where the two bank people were put in there by the raiders. So they have that. And then they have the Conger's rifle, and they have the spent bullets that aren't smashed and look like gum. St. Albans has some of the buildings are still standing. Other places like TD Bank is there now, but it's the Franklin County Bank, and they have, plaques. So you can actually go and see some of the actual buildings or the sites of them. They're called witness buildings because they were witness to the event. And it's just an amazing thing. The fact that it is so well documented in St. Albans alone. I think that's where it really is all documented. I mean, they have all these photos, all these booklets about this. And so when I was going to start this project, I went up there and bought everything they had in their gift shop. All the books, all the pamphlets, all the maps, everything. And then I went online and I researched everything and I could about the raid. And that's when I fell into the Confederate Secret Service hole and realized how connected everything was. And I don't know where this, I guess I don't have a slide for it, but I have, so I don't have to try to remember it all. Just something, FYI, I'm almost done. So I said that it wasn't learned until the Lincoln conspirators' trials that things were all connected and that you had a Confederate Secret Service that was well established, that started way before the Civil War broke out. And all of this stuff was connected. So there are things that they were orchestrating outside of our country to do this before Lincoln's assassination. They tried burning 15 hotels in New York City in November 1864. They tried that Greek fire stuff again. It didn't work. They went around to these hotel rooms and they thought they'd get a room burning on each floor, and they'd take that Greek fire and smash it in the sink. Yeah, it didn't work, but they tried. There was also the attempt to spread yellow fever in Washington, D.C. That was Blackburn. Louis Blackburn was the scientist behind that. I think that's his name. And what they decided to do, they sent packages from Canada down to Washington, D.C. of blankets and clothing that had been exposed to yellow fever germs. I don't get it, but anyway, they thought that if you touched it, you'd get it. And they figured they could wipe out Washington, D.C. if they sent these packages. It's almost like an anthrax scare, except it's on clothes. That didn't work.
And then the raids, they tried that. They tried destroying steamships on the Great Lakes. They tried 2 prison breaks, like I said, Camp Douglas and the other one. Nope, can't remember it. It was on Johnson Island, right? Thank you. So those didn't work because, they got found out. They did try kidnapping the president, and that didn't work. But what did work was that John Wilkes Booth had a whole team. They were going to assassinate Lincoln, and that happened. And the other thing that worked was the St. Albans raid actually worked. Even though they got arrested and they didn't get all the money for the Confederacy, and it was a big fiasco that almost turned into another war for the U.S., for the American Union side. It did scare everybody in New England. It scared everybody in Vermont to the point of lockdown for months. And it is something that even Edwin Stanton, I have to read this one. So the honorary Edwin Sowles of St. Albans did an address in the late 1800s about the St. Albans raid to the Vermont Historical Society. And he said, in conclusion, I beg to say that the facts and circumstances connected with this St. Albans raid became generally known throughout the civilized world, and that Secretary Edwin Stanton afterwards, in conversation with Mr. Sowles himself, declared it to be one of the important events of the war, not so much as transferring in part the scenes and horrors of war, but as leading to serious and dangerous complications with Great Britain through the desires and efforts of the Southern people to involve Canada, and through her, Britain, in a war on behalf of their Southern friends. So Stanton was convinced that this was a huge monumental turning point, but unfortunately not enough people even today know about it. And even today, it's almost... even today, they're still questioning John Wilkes Booth, even Dr. Mudd. There was a movie back in the 90s, I think, about Dr. Mudd and how, he wasn't guilty. Yes, he was. Read the transcripts. You really have to dive into the history, and it's all out there, and read about the Secret Service and who were the spies, who and what were they doing. And all of it was tangled together, and our raiders were all a part of that too. So the thing I'm going to leave you with is that the Confederate Commission up in Montreal and in Toronto, and our raiders did not anticipate going up against Vermonters, because you have people who were willing to step up in the midst of chaos and say, you can't do that to my town, and go after them and actually break treaty laws and arrest them on foreign soil. Booyah is what I say. I mean, that is a true testament. All of the information and all the letters, all the accounts I read, I kept thinking, what brave people. They didn't hide in their cellars once the attack happened, waiting for more. They really did think more was coming, like a second wave. No, they got out there, and even the women were ready to beat somebody with a broom if they had to. They would do what they had to take, and I think that's something that we need to commend them for. And then the other side of the picture is that the raiders were not evil. They were just soldiers doing a mission, just like other missions. So it's a really kind of a complex story, but it is fantastic. So I hope that this has shed light on it and maybe got you a little curious to do some digging, because there's an awful lot of rabbit holes out there. It's just really amazing. But I appreciate your time and the time that we had to go. We went over just a tad. Please look at the display. There are books. There are things out here to check out. So thank you very much.